Hello there, this is Timothy Wilkie. I'm just responding to a video that I uploaded last week. It was pretty much a silent video, point for point, just telling the audience to pause on the frame and just read point per point of the civil lawsuit. And then the video before that was just simply, me stating, hey, look, if I am the misidentified Sherman suspect in the Barry and Honey Sherman murder case, essentially all you would need to know is that I was a random person, and after 6 years, the Toronto police asked someone to come forward as the video suspect. And since I've came forward to Division 51, Division 52, and even the Toronto Police Headquarters as the misidentified suspect in the video, the onus was on Toronto Police because they asked the public to come forward. So it's really on them to either acknowledge or refute that I did come forward. So, even if you were to think that that was the case, right, that I was a random person, that is pretty much the impetus to why you should think, I don't know if I use the word impetus right, but that's pretty much the reason why you would think, hey, look, it could have been someone just walking through the neighborhood. That is the most likely explanation. It's actually not a crazy murder plot that is the most likely explanation. It's simply, one or even dozens of people could have passed through, a murder scene just randomly because, neighborhoods have people in it. And that's why, the nature of a lot of these things is that, hey, random things happen. But that's not what my most recent video that I uploaded last week was about. It was actually about my civil lawsuit. So if you don't believe, that just on its face, right, that a random person could walk by the neighborhood, my last video actually goes into detail why I think I was set up by the Toronto police and that may have been implicated in Barry and Honey Sherman's murder. Because essentially, one of the first points in my civil lawsuit is that there's this guy named Detective Hank Insignia. He recently retired and bailed out from the Toronto police, essentially because, a few weeks ago, because I think his hand was forced, right? He is embarrassed because in my civil lawsuit, I think he retired because one of the first points is that he basically went to my correctional facility in 2011 for whatever reason, and he falsely posed as my legal representation. So, a Toronto homicide detective goes to a correctional facility in Ottawa around 2011, and he's in one of those interview rooms, right? Like, the jail guards tell me I have a visitor and that is my legal representation. I go to that interview room, and in it, Hank Insignia forces me under duress to essentially sign a document which he called a non-disclosure agreement. So till this day, I actually have no idea what he was intending to do with my signature. Right? He was threatening me essentially. And when you're behind bars, there's a lot of stuff that's going on. You constantly feel like you're in threat of violence and danger. So, yeah, I was coerced into signing this document. And what's crazy about this is that when I left the cell, when I left that interview room, I was put in a cell and I could hear the inmates over talking. And they were saying, oh my God, he just signed his life away. Because I'm pretty sure that those inmates knew that Hank Insignia was like this big lead homicide detective. I had no idea. So then, fast forward 6 years from 2011 to 2017, I'm walking in Old Colony Road, and a cop car pulls onto the street. Right, so I put my head down. I'm very nervous, right, because I don't like being followed by police. I don't like police in general. And then essentially, I'm trudging through, I don't think it was snowy that night, not that snowy, but I had my boots on, and I remember walking, like keeping my head down, because I was very nervous because a cop car pulled onto the street. So essentially, you have to remember that Barry and Honey Sherman initially were said to have the police said that it was a murder suicide. So think about that for a minute. Toronto police said it was a murder suicide. They said that Barry Sherman killed his wife Honey Sherman and then killed himself. Which, if you actually look from the crime photos, Kevin Donovan goes into detail that it was impossible, essentially, for them to be sitting in that like very casual position, and from the way that their necks were hanging, it was impossible for Barry to kill himself and kill his wife and then just sit there strangled, because the angle wouldn't have put pressure onto the larynx or onto the throat in the way that they were positioned. So wait a minute. You know, this goofy, silly guy, Hank Insignia, he blackmails me in 2011, or, you know, I think was planning to blackmail me. And then in 2017, a cop car pulls onto the road, you know, just the night before the murder scene. That cop car, mind you, they never stopped me. They never stopped to ask me questions. They didn't ask me shit. So if they were saying it was a murder-suicide, did the Toronto police know that it was not? Because then why would they be in the neighborhood on that specific night of the murder? So it actually kind of points to, hey, wait a minute. Toronto police may have known about the murder, and they may have actually been implicated in killing Barry and Honey Sherman. Because keep in mind, dozens of the Sherman's devices were confiscated. In my lawsuit, it goes through the motions of explaining that my devices were hacked. Even now, as I'm recording on this phone, right? In the darkness of my apartment, when I'm just kind of just sitting here, this light will shine, like a black screen will shine, and I know they're listening in on me. You know, Bill Blair, the ex-police chief of Toronto Police, was bragging about essentially hacking people's phones or going around the law because of people's basic phone app preferences. And that was a long time ago. That was like a minute ago. So now, I believe the Toronto police are just skirting around the law, and they're basically hacking people's phones without a warrant. Because the Toronto police can basically act as criminals without impunity. Sorry, with total impunity. You know, they can do anything they want. And they're not pressured by the court system at all. There's an entire spy network of not just Toronto police, but citizen officers, liaison officers from Hamilton, from Durham Region, Peel, all these people, citizen officers, undercover cops, lawyers, doctors. Like, it really gets that crazy. And in my civil lawsuit, it shows you that there's a spy network of people related to the HHR law firm, Scott Hutchison's law firm. Essentially, his law firm was working on the Sherman case. One of his lawyers, Charlie White, I believe contacted someone who lives in my building. And these people are spying on me and like coming to my door and harassing me. They're coming to my work, right? And then they're spreading rumors about me. So it's just crazy when you really break down just how unfair the law is, regardless if you've committed a crime or not. So, you know, I'm just kind of going over some of these points, is that, you know, my phone has acted like haywired. When I actually confronted an undercover cop, my phone started acting up in real time. And, you know, this guy claimed to be a CSIS officer, but essentially this guy's name's Zachary Montague. And this guy stopped me in my apartment, and he claimed to be a CSIS agent, like a Canadian intelligence CSIS agent. And he gave me his first name, Zachary. So I was like, okay. So I go on the TPS website on Toronto Police, I go to Division 51, and then I go to their neighborhood officers page. And then I see a Zachary Montague. So then I start getting a little bit, you know, a little bit curious, like, oh, where could this lead to? I go on Facebook, I look up the name Zachary Montague, and there you go. It's this silly, goofy guy that apparently worked for Division 51. When I went to the Marine unit, when I went to Division 51, they told me he was an officer working out of Hamilton. So what does that mean? You go on Hamilton Police's own website, and then you go to their investigative team or whatever, and it says that they liaison officers to the Toronto Police. So essentially, if you're being harassed by some racist, silly, goofy guy, the Toronto Police take no responsibility for it. Right? They can harass you, come to your work, spread rumors about you. And keep in mind, police rumors is police sabotage. People essentially will give up information about you in your workplace. Your coworkers will give up information because they're afraid of violence or repercussion themselves. So what that means is that Toronto police can bully, gossip, and rumor their way into an office space or into somebody's workplace, wherever that may be, out in the open, in the air, working on the street, doing whatever kind of job, with no repercussion. They can gossip their way into these office spaces, essentially, and it creates an entire city here in Toronto that, it makes you think, like, how toxic of a city is it when it's not truth and justice that reign supreme? It's a lot of these, it's a lot of just toxic, social interactions that have real world like implications. It isolates people. It makes people feel like they don't have a voice, and that, if they can't go to the news, then they can't challenge the police in a lot of ways. But, bringing this back around to the Sherman case, Detective Hank Insignia, the guy who was working on Bruce McArthur, the serial killer case, what they were saying is that TPS was so strained and that their ranks were so thinned that, of course, they let like dozens of people die in the serial, Division 51 specifically. They turned away dozens of people on that case. Only until Andrew Kinsman, a white guy, and only until people started complaining about Andrew Kinsman did they take the case serious. So, TPS, they're creating their own problems. They claim to have an 85% crime clearance rate, but they do poor on the Bruce McArthur case, and then it goes directly into the Barry and Honey Sherman murder case. So here we go. Detective Hank Insignia. A couple weeks after I filed my civil lawsuit, what was the first article that got released by the media? It was the Toronto Sun. What did he say in the Toronto Sun? He sounded disgruntled. He said he had to decompress. He said, there's losers in this town, and that he has to really think, he's going to really have to enjoy his retirement. He's going to start working on his home, and this sad story, So, that was the first story. So what do you mean? You have to decompress for what? You were in the police force for over a decade. How many years? What do you got to decompress for? You went to early retirement for what? You're talking about losers in this town and blah, blah, blah. It kind of seems like your hand was forced, Hank. Doesn't really seem like you wanted to quit TPS now, did you? So that's crazy. And that's what makes me think that he's fucking guilty. I believe that Hank Insignia was the one who was implicated in helping murder Barry and Honey Sherman. Because essentially, a lot of the family members were not in the country. They were in Japan or Florida or whatever. So I can't really speak on to who's guilty and who may have been, a part of conspiring to kill Barry and Honey Sherman, at least on the family side. But if you listen to Kathleen Goldhar from CBC, she released a podcast and she was saying that she spoke with someone an ex-Scotland Yard detective. So if you're not aware of the Scotland Yard, again, it's kind of like a misnomer, right? It's a silly little misnomer. You would think Scotland Yard is attached to Scotland. No, Scotland Yard is a UK intelligence agency, and they were saying, Kathleen Goldhar was saying from CBC that there's a guy named Paul Wybrow, I don't know. And Paul Wybrow, this intelligence officer, was saying that someone in the Toronto police had CP that was going to blackmail Barry Sherman. So the only one, aside from Kathleen Goldhar in the news from CBC, corroborating that the Toronto police are somehow implicated in the Sherman murder was me. I'm the guy who came forward and said he was misidentified in the video and that a cop car pulled onto the road on December 13th of 2017, and I believe Hank Insignia was the dude. Why did Hank have CP? That's what's interesting. Why do I think Hank Insignia, not only just trying to blackmail me and trying to forge my signature or whatever, force me into a non-disclosure agreement, but understand how power works. Understand how these systems and structures work. Hank Insignia was the lead homicide detective. Hank Insignia also essentially ran the missing persons unit. Interesting. So in my lawsuit, as I go over, there essentially was a body found at Lakeshore, right? Lakeshore Boulevard. And I was working at 333 Lakeshore Boulevard on a film set when a bunch of officers came to my workplace and they were spreading rumors. And of course, they were saying some heinous, untrue shit that you could imagine is very, very uncomfortable for anyone to accuse you of doing, especially when you're innocent. So yeah, that frustrated me. Like, I mean, it's just an absurd situation to be in. But why is it important to the case, to the Barry and Honey Sherman murder case? Exhibit A. See, the thing is, Toronto police, not only do they suck at being cops, the Toronto police really suck at being criminals, right? And when the Lakeshore body was found, I think last winter in 2002, I have to go back and check the date, so excuse me on that. But essentially, they came to my workplace spreading rumors like this person, like the day after, they come to my workplace spreading rumors, which gave me the impression that this person was murdered. Then a day after, or a couple days after, how long, then in the news, they said that the body found at Lakeshore was a suicide. So it got me thinking, could someone who runs the homicide desk and the missing persons desk claim initially that the person was murdered, but then realize in hindsight that they can't falsely incriminate someone for that murder, and then they default, and in the news, instead of saying it's a murder, they tell the media it's a suicide. So essentially, a case that should be classified as a murder gets shuffled to the missing persons. Who's responsible for both of those desks? Hank Insignia. Now, another case, if you know Raheem White, Raheem was kind of an interesting case here in Toronto because the Toronto police claimed that Raheem essentially killed himself. I don't know if it hit the news, if they said that, but they said that there was a belt and it was wrapped around his neck and that's where they found Raheem or something like that, right? But what's crazy is I actually spoke to Raheem White's mother. And I spoke to Maureen Trask, a person who was working close with missing persons case. So from those two people, I gathered that the Toronto police were just making it seem like Raheem's body was found next to a homeless encampment, and that essentially Raheem was a vagabond and a street dude, and he was just roaming the streets. He was at Cherry was it Cherry Beach, and he was contemplating suicide, and he was camping out there, and that he was a loser, and that he was just a nobody, that he had no upward projection in his life. And that's not true at all, because the thing about Raheem White, and I'm going to bring this back around to the Barry Honey Sherman case, so just give me a minute. But essentially, I went back to Cherry Beach, and the homeless encampment was essentially owned by a guy named Dave. He said he had lived there for the last 4 years and that the encampment belonged to him, meaning that Raheem had nothing to do with that encampment. Meaning that the belt that was found on that tree, when I went there, it wasn't taken. Meaning TPS did not bring it as forensic evidence, and they did not exclude murder from, possibly Raheem being murdered, being strangled to death. So this got me thinking. It really got me thinking back to Barry and Honey Sherman's murder case. Could someone in Toronto police, instead of classifying that person as a murderer, just shuffle the case into the missing persons desk? Could Hank and Cigna shuffle a homicide case into the missing persons? So, you know what, listen. If someone in Toronto police would have set up Barry and Honey Sherman, there could be dozens of cases. It doesn't even have to be Hank. It could be dozens of cases of someone just allowing strangulations to go by unnoticed and unchecked. And if you look at Toronto's court history, essentially there was a pathologist named Charles Smith. And this guy, Charles Smith, in the court systems, he accused dozens of families of killing their own children in like the worst ways. And a lot of the method that he was accusing families of was strangulation. So if you're a Toronto police officer and you've been on the force for 20 years plus, or however many years, you would know of this court case. And you would know that strangulation is a very dicey way to kill someone, and that it could potentially, if misused by forensics and people in law enforcement and the courts, it could really damage a case, or at least whitewash a case for being something that it's not, or being misinterpreted, or being, falsely swept under the rug, where dozens of officers could have got away with strangulation. So this is why it's important to scrutinize a lot of these systems. I'm trying to think about other things, my civil lawsuit. Just very sketchy stuff in general with my devices and my phone. And even in the Barry and Honey Sherman case, it was said that Barry, I think one of his passwords was like 1234. One of the housekeepers to the Shermans, she would have had access to all Honey's devices. She would have known their schedule. And I'm not saying, again, the housekeeper had anything to do with it, but a lot of their information was just out there. Barry and Honey Sherman, they did not have any security surveillance cameras on their house, right? They had a home alarm system that I don't think was triggered that day. So a lot of the things you would think, well, why would a billionaire couple not have surveillance? Because, they were these very frugal billionaires that just said, oh, well, if anything happens, something happens. So they weren't really in the mindset of home security. So a lot of their devices could have been vulnerable. And again, because I've had, some people harassing me in my civil lawsuit, I brought up the HHR law firm, Hainan, Hutchison, and Robitaille. And essentially because HHR law firm, essentially they were working on the Sherman case. You got to understand, this law firm is also one of the law firms in the city that has the unique ability of doing legal work when it comes to cybersecurity, cyber crime. So again, I would scrutinize this law firm, because if Toronto police are using people's devices to surveil them in a malicious way to go around the law, then of course, why wouldn't TPS work with HH&R to have some sort of legal cover for them doing illegal activities, legal and illegal activities on people's electronic devices? You know, this Zachary Montague guy, this undercover cop, you know, let's say he was CSIS. You know, I stepped to this guy and I started recording him with my phone, and my phone in real time started freaking out in a way that I never saw it do before. You know, when I tried to do a live stream on YouTube or record the video, YouTube started freaking out. Like, it conked out, and I had to re-upload the page several times, like 4 or 6 times. The page dropped, and I had to go back into Google, go back onto YouTube, and try and press record again. And then when I tried to use the record function instead of YouTube, the record function on my phone, it conked out, and the window closed like 4 or 5 times again, same thing, in real time. So a lot of these undercover officers, you know, of course, being an undercover, you wear all black, but also you have these, a lot of the time you'll see them with the Apple AirPods, and they're walking around the street with their phones out. Because why? Because, you know, Toronto police and a lot of these police departments, they have these police departments have an IT team or a crime analytics team, and their team is literally shouting in information through their little Apple AirPods. And, you know, whenever they see someone walking on the street that they don't like, or they're surveilling or trying to get information on, all these guys got to do is text their phone and follow these people around. And this Zachary Montague guy, you know, if he's saying he's CSIS, then it would make sense that they could hack my phone in real time. But if he's not CSIS, and if he's just some douchebag undercover cop liaisoned through Hamilton Police to the Toronto Police, then that's really disturbing, because what that suggests is that Toronto Police have now been using this software that can hack people's phones in a military-grade capacity. And this is why I want government to step forward and bring legislature to say that, hey, you know, even intelligence agencies should be scrutinized on how they target the public with these, you know, with this AI and with this military-grade software. That cyber weapons are information weapons. And when you give up information on someone, you're potentially hurting their livelihood, their health. You're putting their lives in jeopardy, essentially. You know, and if the Toronto police, why should they have that capacity to do that? These guys suck at their jobs. These guys claim they have an 85% crime clearance rate, but they didn't do so well on that Bruce McArthur case. It's been 6 years. And all they got is that grainy footage that they took my likeness of. And again, for anyone who needs to know, I recognize myself in the video because the day after of being in that neighborhood, it hit the news. And they said Barry and Honey Sherman were murdered. So even though it's a grainy footage and you couldn't tell who was in the video, from my perspective, it was like a paper cutout of my body shape, form, and posture. Like my body kinetics, how I move. Like my personality was in that body shape from the way I moved. And then the next day, they're reporting on the news that Barry and Honey Sherman were murdered. And I was like, oh, shit. Like, I was there that night. What's really going on? A cop car pulled on the street with me. And that's when I felt like I was set up. So look, I'm just going to leave this video here. It's like almost 30 minutes. But if maybe I'll make a part 2 as a reaction to the civil lawsuit that I put up. But so far, this is the 3rd video that I've uploaded. So check the previous 2 out. And yeah, again, my name is Timothy Wilkie. I am the misidentified Barry and Honey Sherman Video Suspect, known as the Walking Man or Night Walker. So, yeah, again, I'm sorry for anyone who thinks that I'm just trying to gain attention and I'm just, oh, look at me, I'm a fucking murder suspect. No, that's not the case, right? Like, I don't have any connection to Barry and Honey Sherman. I didn't know them. But I just don't think it's fair that they can close the courts on a criminal case of two billionaires being murdered when, in all likelihood, if you know that these billionaires can get murdered and after 6 years it's becoming a cold case, I'm sorry. But the average Canadian is not going to be protected by the police. And I'm just sick of the harassment and the surveillance and the mistreatment and the abuse. So if it's any consolation to anyone else, I don't want anyone to go through this of what I'm going through. But specifically, Barry and Honey Sherman were murdered, and possibly by the police. So if they're not keeping them safe, they're not going to keep you or I safe. So you really need to know that. But yeah, anyways, my name's Timothy Wilkie. Have a good day, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.